When we talk about eye safety, we're talking about taking folks who, even if they're not, say, addicted in that sense, people use the internet for convenience, they use it for fun, they use it for all these wonderful benefits. You tell them to block pop-ups and everything's, I had this happen to me, and even I said, okay, let the pop-ups come on. I want to go to foodnetwork.com and get a recipe. I have my pop-ups turned off. I have my spyware blocking, double-click, and Avenue A, and all this other stuff that it gets blocked. But I can't get a darn recipe when I want it. Somebody wants a recipe, they turn that stuff off. Okay, so the idea here is that you have people engaged in behaviors that bring them immediate benefits, things that make them feel good in some circumstances, things that make their life easier. Convenience, if you ask a consumer about things they like about products and services, always one of the number one things that always pops up these days is convenience. Convenience is the number one consumer benefit that they look for in anything. Okay, well, no, I want you to check your spyware. Oh, please, I've got to go do this. So we really have a challenge. And you guys can create the best safety, security software in existence. But if you want people to actually use it, it isn't just about human factors engineering. I was talking to one of the students earlier. He says, oh, so you determine should the light be blue or green? And I said, absolutely not. That's a human factors engineering piece. That's product development. That's, let's make the product work well so people can interact with it. This is beyond that. This is deeper. It goes to the core of human nature and the core of what you have to do to appeal to people. How do we convince people to become safe online? Our particular model that we call our eye safety model borrows from several different areas in psychology. One of my areas of expertise as I came to this project is cognitive processing. And so in other domains, I have modeled how people take information from the environment, from the web and other places, and how they actually create their own inferences, cognitive responses, and affective responses, and how do they integrate them and bring them together to actually create new knowledge and then influence their responses. So that becomes a critical part of what we're doing, because how people process information is one of the first pieces. Is what do we need to do to make that information easier to process and get them to actually work at it? It takes cognitive effort to process information. That's why it's really hard when you study at night and you're reading your books and saying, I've got to learn it. Because it's hard. You're not running around, you're not working up a sweat, but your brain's saying, give me a rest already. Social cognitive behavior change. There are models that have been driven by Albert Bandura's initial social cognitive approach to human behavior. And Bandura based his work on the original work of Skinner and Thompson, operant instrumental learning theory that says people behave, or rats, mice, people, behave in ways based on the consequences they experience. So all behavior is shaped by consequences. This is a real critical piece to our puzzle. But what's a little different, what Bandura said was, Skinner said people have to have the experience to have the behavior change. And clearly that's a very strong way to create habits. But Bandura said, you know what, people have memory, people have thoughts, people can observe others and learn from other experiences to also then build this knowledge. But the emphasis still is on this. If I engage in this behavior, what consequence will I receive? And there are several concepts that come up here that I'll talk about in the next slide that are really critical to understand whether or not somebody, even if they know they should do it, whether or not they actually will. And then we also look to the literature on health and behavior change. And this, as I said before, the model for eye safety is very similar to models that we use in health promotion, which is asking people to break bad habits to establish good ones for actually little immediate benefit. Protection motivation is a theory that has evolved in this area that we've borrowed from and adapted and modified. And protection motivation theory says that individuals will be motivated to protect themselves only under certain circumstances. So we've put all these things together in an attempt to say, what are those key variables? Can I actually identify the characteristics of individuals, some of which might be considered personality, some of which can be learned? What are those key factors that are going to determine whether or not somebody might engage in this behavior? Okay. These are the key ingredients. Last week, our vice president for intellectual property, the Office of Intellectual Property, called me. They filed a provisional patent, and the term they use is, so what's your secret sauce, and what are we patenting? And right now, what we're patenting is the very fine nuances of these key ingredients and what we do with them to create the appeals to actually get people to change their behavior. So these are the key pieces, and we have a provisional patent, so we don't really have the inventory items and everything created, but we're moving forward because I don't think, and the lawyers obviously don't think, anybody else understands this or is working on this right now. The first key is motivation. How do you make people want to do it? That's very difficult, and that's something that we have to work on. We know that motivation is key. One of the words I use for motivation is called involvement. It comes out of social psychology. And involvement is a term that represents a person's perception of the connectedness of an object or an issue to themselves. So if you're thinking about all the political elections that are coming up in November, and you think about how important is the economy to you as an issue, your involvement with that issue would be how close to home you see that. So I'm taking some liberty with that. How connected are you to safety and security issues? How close is that to you? Well, the greater the involvement with that issue, what happens is this involvement kicks in motivation, and it says, okay, I got to do something about that. It's human nature. It's automatic. Talking about what's automatic. When people are involved, the rest of it comes. So the trick here is there a way, I don't know if we can we get people involved with this issue? Because when they are, we will motivate them. Knowledge, that's obviously a key ingredient. That's basic. And I think what we're playing with is not just the knowledge, because we have people who can write down, this is how you configure a firewall, this is how you work your, ad-aware, this is how you work your virus protection. How do you word it so that somebody actually understands it? And how do you create some series of, say, practices that lets them then feel confident that they can do it? And I think that perhaps the biggest secrets in our secret sauce are the last two. Because the term confidence really represents the key issues that we call coping efficacy and response efficacy. Coping efficacy is the confidence a person has in his or her own abilities to perform a behavior. If you ask people, gee, do you know how to configure a firewall? Most of them are going to say, oh, what are you, crazy? Of course I don't know how. And we found that coping efficacy is a very strong determinant of what people do. If I feel I can do it, I'm more likely to do it. If I don't think I can, why should I try? There's a second kind of efficacy, which is response efficacy. That's a perception that the tool will work. That's a perception that if I actually do that behavior, will I get the results that I expect or that you've promised me? Response efficacy is actually a lot easier to create, and we found in some of my our baseline studies where we're measuring these concepts, most people get response efficacy. They know if you use virus protection, it's going to work. If I use a firewall, it's going to work. If I use spyware, it's going to work. But if you ask them, do you know how? They say, well, no. There are actually some other concepts I don't have listed here. And I'll give you one example that really frightens me. Is that when we ask people about the likelihood of some of these security threats happening to them, most of them will say it's very low. But if you ask them how severe are the consequences, most of them will say, well, that's pretty rotten if that happens. But they think it